Today we're tackling a big question. How accurate are your expectations about your retirement spending? And how much does that really matter? A McKinsey study found that while only 10% of retirees spend significantly less than they did before retiring, 43% say that they underestimated how much they'd spend. That mismatch between what you think you'll spend and what you'll actually spend is something that I call the expectation-reality gap. And in my experience, it's one of the most overlooked but most important parts of retirement planning. As a partner of a retirement planning firm, I've helped countless retirees navigate this exact challenge. And after building hundreds of retirement plans, I can tell you this gap is real and it's common. But here's the good news, it's also fixable. That's exactly why I'm making this video, to help you figure out where you fall on what I call the expectation-reality gap spectrum and what that could mean for your financial future. Let's get right into it. So at one end of the spectrum, we have the overshooters. These are folks who expected retirement to cost a lot less than it actually does. They either assume that their spending would drop off once their working years ended, or they simply didn't have a clear understanding of what they were spending to begin with, and guessed that it would be less than it turned out to be. This crowd is unquestionably at the greatest risk of running into trouble later in retirement because they underestimate how much income that their savings and their investments needs to produce each year. That in turn leads them to underestimate the growth that their money needs to achieve to sustain that level of spending, which ultimately underestimates the odds that they'll run out of financial assets during their lifetime. In the middle of the spectrum, you'll find the aligners. These are the retirees who got it mostly right. Their expectations about spending lined up fairly well with the reality. Their plan wasn't perfect, and no one's is, but it was close enough to stay flexible and adjust as life unfolded. Aligners tend to have the highest confidence in their plan because they've done the work to keep it grounded in reality. They're often very aware of what their income looked like during their working years and how much of that income they'll actually need to replace in retirement. Now, I'm not a huge fan of strict budget spreadsheets. There's often a lot of noise, and I found that it can be easy for expenses to slip through the cracks, but I found that many real-life aligners tend to keep clean, tight spending systems. Maybe it's not a rigid budget, but they track enough to have a real handle on their cash flow. And finally, at the other end of the spectrum, we have the undershooters. These are folks who went into retirement expecting to spend more than they actually do. Maybe they were being ultra conservative, or maybe they simply overestimated the cost of retirement. Either way, they end up living well below their means. In some cases, this group is influenced by legacy goals. They may have a strong desire to leave money to their kids, which introduces a natural bias towards making more conservative assumptions. If you've watched any of my videos, you know that I'm more of a fan of this kind of thinking because at the end of the day, the future is uncertain, and financial planning is really just the process of modeling how your financial resources hold up given your expected cash flow. Sure, we can predict some variables with relative confidence, but others, like the timing of below average market returns over shorter periods, those will always carry uncertainty. So leaning towards the conservative end of the assumption spectrum might bring a bit more financial pain now, but it can improve your odds of avoiding far greater pain later. And that's not to say that you shouldn't strike a balance, because you don't want to miss out on meaningful experiences that can carry you through difficult times. But I just believe that you should view retirement risk through the full lens of retirement, not just the first 10 years. I ran a simple study to help illustrate the magnitude of the expectation-reality gap, and here's what I found. For every 10% underestimation of spending, a retiree's portfolio runs out about 1 to 1.5 years sooner on average. So let's use an example. If a retiree is an overshooter with a 30% gap, that means that they expected to need $120,000 per year from their portfolio, but in reality, they needed 30% more, or $156,000 in this case. According to my study, their portfolio would have ran out roughly 5 years earlier than they expected. Now, this is a high-level study. It assumes static spending, and it doesn't account for the many dynamic factors that come into play in real life. The intention of this study was to isolate the impact of the spending gap itself. Everybody's situation is different, and the actual impact could be bigger or smaller. But think about the potential implications of this. That person could now be on track to run out of money by the age of 75 instead of 80, or 85 instead of 90. And at that stage of life, the odds that at least one spouse are still alive are very high. It all boils down to this. The expectation-reality gap can quietly shape your retirement decisions. And if you're not careful, you could end up making major life choices that expose you to financial pain at the very time that you can least afford it. If you agree that this is important and you'd like an assessment of your spending in your retirement plan, click the first link in the description of this video. The link will bring you to my website, where all you have to do is answer a few questions, and within a few days, I'll send you a complimentary video to your email sharing my thoughts. But moving on, so why does this expectation reality gap happen in the first place? A few reasons. Some people simply don't have a clear picture of what they were spending before retirement, so they start off with the wrong baseline. Others assume that their lifestyle will automatically get cheaper, but forget to factor in less common budget items like the occasional home improvement that creates a major cash need or the purchase of a new vehicle. And let's be honest, sometimes fear plays a role. People guess low to stay safe, or they guess high to feel prepared, but either way, the guess becomes the foundation of the plan, and that can be dangerous. So what can you do about it? Well, if you're an aligner or an undershooter, the stakes are a little different. In those cases, I'd focus more on defining your legacy goals and running what-if scenarios for outlier risks, like one spouse needing custodial care. These are important, but they don't usually call for a major course correction. But if you're an overshooter, you really only have two options. The first, you can cut your spending, and the second, you can adjust your time frame. Now, I'm not a big fan of number one. In my experience, it's really hard for retirees to materially change their lifestyle after they stop working. So in my opinion, it's better to plan around your lifestyle than to try and force your lifestyle to fit into a plan that may be too optimistic. Which brings us to the second option, adjust your time frame. What does that mean? It means working longer, so you have more time to accumulate the assets that are needed to support your actual lifestyle. And that's not just about dollars. Every extra year that you work can meaningfully reduce your retirement risk. And in many cases, it can increase your sense of fulfillment in retirement because you've earned it with a greater sense of security and freedom. I'm not trying to preach here. This is just what I believe after working with hundreds of real retirees. So how do you actually figure out where you fall on the expectation reality spectrum? The best place to start is by figuring out what you spend right now while you're still working. That gives you a clean, personal benchmark. And here's exactly how I help clients do it. Start with your total income before taxes. This includes wages or any other earned income. Subtract any pre-tax savings that you're making into retirement accounts because you're not spending this is being saved. Then subtract out the income taxes that you pay, since those aren't a part of your discretionary spending either. If you're reinvesting your investment income and not using it to fund your lifestyle during your working years, subtract the investment taxes that are tied to that as well. Then add an estimate for home maintenance. I usually use 1 to 2% of your home's value per year, depending on the age of your home and how handy you are. If you pay cash for new vehicles, take the total cost of both cars and then divide it by how many years you typically keep them, and add that back as an annual estimate. And lastly, subtract any cash that you're consistently saving that's going into non-retirement accounts. For example, if your bank account balance grows by $10,000 per year on average, that's not spending, it's saving. Also, be careful with one-time expenses when you're analyzing your bank accounts. If you've already accounted for them in your home or your car calculations, don't double count them. But if they were truly one-off and not factored in elsewhere, you may want to add those back. The number that you're left with is a pretty solid estimate of what it actually costs you to live, and that's where the planning starts. If you can get this number right, you're starting with a much better foundation. From here, you can start to think more realistically about how those expenses may change in retirement. And I'd encourage you to be as objective as possible. Don't just subtract what's going away, like your commute, without also adding back what's likely to appear, like more frequent travel. So in summary, your expectations about what you'll spend in retirement are often equally as important as what you actually spend in reality, because your expectations are ultimately what drive your decisions. I believe the prerequisite for a solid retirement decision is to spend the time analyzing your spending needs. At a minimum, your assumptions should be rooted in reality. Retirement planning can be overwhelming, and it goes without saying that the stakes are high, so you want to get it right. If you'd like to gain a better understanding of where you stand for retirement, click the first link in the description of this video. It will take you to my website where you'll submit some information, and then within a few days, I'll email you a personalized video outlining my thoughts about where you stand. I hope you found this video helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.